Formula One is back this weekend with all new regulations for the Australian Grand Prix. But while we've all been oohing at Ferrari's rear wing and ahhing at how badly Aston Martin have cocked things up, far less attention has been paid to the calendar. For 2026, we're about to be graced with yet another street circuit, this time in Madrid, while Imola has fallen back off the calendar. And from next year, Catalunya and Spa-Francorchamps are having to alternate. In short, I'm not very happy. So I've regressed to about 8 years of age, I found my colouring pens, and I've been drawing racing circuits. So today on Twin Cam, this is how I would improve the F1 calendar. Before we get into it, I just wanted to go over what we're doing here. While there are circuits I'd swap onto and off of the calendar, I've had a go at improving the designs of the circuits. In places to make them more dramatic, slower, easier for overtaking, less clumsy, or simply a lot faster. And for the sake of argument, we might as well begin in Albert Park. Formula One has been racing in Melbourne since 1996, when Jacques Villeneuve finished second on his debut, the win plucked from his grasp by an oil leak which soaked his Williams teammate, race winner and eventual world champion Damon Hill. And from then till 2020, the layout remained the same. In 2021, however, the organisers opened many of the corners up, tightened another and removed the chicane to both make the circuit faster and improve overtaking. This, however, is what I would do in order to improve it further. In red is my version of the Albert Park circuit, while the real-life layout is in grey and the pit lane is coloured blue. And as you can tell, I've retained most of the circuit's character, choosing more to elaborate on the changes already made rather than starting afresh. I rather like Melbourne, but I do think it could be improved. Turns 1, 2 and 3 all remain in place, but I feel turns 4 and 5 could do with easing a little to improve the circuit's flow and possibly increase speeds a little. Turn 4 runs through a car park, so there's no issue redirecting it here, while turn 5 runs onto grassland parallel to the existing circuit. To accommodate this, I've re-angled the straight up Albert Road Drive, but it's all rather minimal. A more major change is at turn 6, which continues past the junction with Lakeside Drive, lengthening the straight and creating a decent braking zone before a 90-degree right-hander brings us back to reality. The circuit then continues past the deleted chicane to the fast left-right kinks at turn 8 and 9, the latter of which I've decided to smooth out. All I've done is make the Grand Prix circuit follow the public road instead of the cutouts which slow the Formula One cars, and I'm hoping this will allow cars to follow each other just a tiny bit better. The challenge is still there in turn 8, but there's less aero load on turn 9. Turn 10 is the one that was tightened 5 years ago, and as there's grassland all around, I thought it would make sense to tighten it further, just lengthening the braking zone a small amount. The rest of the circuit is the same as it always was, and at 3.3 miles I feel it flows better, has better overtaking opportunities, and it's probably a little more exciting to watch, all without doing anything really dramatic. Skipping a few rounds, I'm bringing us next to Suzuka, where I've largely attempted to do the same thing. Modifying a circuit so historic is sure to have me branded a heretic, but hear me out. All but 3 corners at Suzuka have at some point been altered, and the one I'm interested in was quite seriously changed in 1987, in preparation for Formula One's first visit the following year, where of course the great Ayrton Senna clinched his first World Championship crown. I'm talking of course about the Degners, and now you know why 2 corners have one name. The current double right-hander is a bit clumsy when you compare it to the flowing curves elsewhere, and despite its slow speed, there's next to zero opportunity for overtaking. It was initially squared off due to a lack of runoff, so I've re-angled the circuit by tightening the Dunlop curve, opening out to a straight before the new faster but more opportunistic Degner. There are no buildings on the outside of this corner, so the runoff should no longer be an issue. Instead, the straight before it would need some serious landscaping and a chunk of demolition in order to be made viable. In other words, it's unrealistic. But if it were possible, I feel it would really improve the spectacle of a circuit everybody loves, but which rarely delivers. The other change I've made is to return 130R to its original form, a little slower than the current easy flat. And if the new straight was aligned correctly, there would be the space to increase runoff on the outside. Finally, I've widened the run into the Casio triangle, the chicane at the end of the lap, just to allow cars more room in going wheel to wheel. At this point, I'd like us to remain in Japan, and I'm going to add Fuji Speedway. This may be a controversial one, as the redeveloped version of this circuit didn't exactly get the best reception in 2007 and 2008. That's partly due to the scheduling. There's a reason this race is known for torrential rain. But also, those two runnings of the Japanese Grand Prix were abysmally organised. Putting all that to one side, however, and we remember James Hunt winning the World Championship in 1976, and Fuji is so well known to motorsport history for its speed. The mile-long straight originally marked the beginning of a truly terrifying lap, but especially after its Tilke redevelopment, the magic isn't quite there anymore. So I've gone about reinstating it. The headline is the rebuilding of the original Daiichi banking, plus the old turns 2 and 3 before they were abandoned in 1974 and demolished in 2004. But of course, making Formula One cars head downhill into a blind section of banking is ridiculous. So on the site of the current Daiichi hairpin is a Monza-style chicane, which feeds cars out onto a section of road at the very bottom of the old banking. I'm thinking Zandvoort levels of banking, and a barrier stopping drivers from using its full extent. After rebuilding what are now turns 4 and 5, those long sweepers, we rejoin the current circuit ahead of an unmodified Suntory, 100R and the hairpin. 300R doesn't really need to be messed with, but I cannot stand the trend of straightening out corners. I mean, why do we need 2 kinks instead of 1 nice curve? So I've returned the circuit to its pre-Tilke style here, but I've elongated it all just to give a longer run into Dunlop. The problems we now encounter are of the circuit's flow and its length. In the case of the former, the modern final sector certainly increases overtaking. This style of complex really bunches cars together before the straight, and it's a great piece of design, but I don't feel it suits the character of a circuit like Fuji. The original layout had a seemingly never-ending final corner, and I've attempted to revive that by preceding it with a flowing and open Dunlop chicane. There's still a decent opportunity for overtaking, but I feel this brings back an element that had otherwise been lost. Besides, adding back the Daiichi loop at the start of the lap means this layout is nearly 3.8 miles, and while that's not as long as Spa, I don't want a lap to feel overwrought. This layout's classic and simple and only has 13 turns. Another circuit I love but I recognise has serious problems is Imola. While we've all complained about its removal from the calendar, I think we can all admit that the races were quite boring. The problems here are twofold. First, that it's too narrow for modern Grand Prix cars, and second, that there's very little opportunity for overtaking. The first of these problems could be improved by widening the circuit, but the clearer solution is to change the formula. Crash safety is of course an issue, but making the cars narrower would markedly improve the spectacle, and I do not think the new regulations go nearly far enough in this regard. But back to Imola, and I think there's a lot that can be done to improve overtaking here. The changes made after 1994 are here for a reason, but I think they prioritised flow at the expense of entertainment. And while the removal of Variante Bassa has certainly improved wheel-to-wheel racing down into Tamburello, a lot more can still be done. Let's start with Tamburello itself, and of course, we can't remove the chicane. The Santerno River runs right behind the barrier, and regardless, I wouldn't want to. I think it's a good chicane, but in my world it would be tightened to force a longer braking zone, and to compensate I've eased off turn 4. You'll notice I've then re-angled the following straight, returning it to its pre-95 route where I've removed the Villeneuve chicane. Its design crippled overtaking into Tosa, and with the Tamburello chicane still in place, speeds are far lower than they were in 94. Plus, the runoff nowadays is much larger, and the new Villeneuve curve I've created is shallower than the original. My aim is for a cleaner run into Tosa than ever before, creating a new overtaking opportunity. The run from Tosa up through Piratella and down to Acque Minerali is art, so I wouldn't dare mess around. Coming back up the hill, however, the crest requires Variante Alta to slow the cars before they run back down towards Ravazza. And while it's been there for over 50 years, it's clumsy. There's no opportunity to get side by side, and while it's moderately entertaining to see cars spin in practice, it's not good racing. I've decided, therefore, to carve out vast swathes of earth in creating an S-bend to replace the chicane, increasing speeds but keeping the cars slower than they would otherwise be. This very natural piece of circuit design then brings the cars down to a tightened Ravazza 1. This combination would seriously increase overtaking, and it's something of a return to how the circuit was before 1995, Ravazza 2 being eased to return a little flow before we complete a now faster, more flowing and substantially improved lap. Oh, and I've curved out the kinks in the straight, because as I mentioned with Fuji, I don't like them. Shifting to a more modern circuit, however, and as of recording, the Bahrain Grand Prix has not yet been cancelled. We'll see. But the Bahrain International Circuit I don't think is many people's favourite. On the other side of that coin, I don't think people dislike it either. More, it's a middling Grand Prix circuit. It's a decent design with some flowing corners, the racing is decent, but I don't think people love it. As a result of that, I've decided to go a bit mad. In 2010, the Bahrain Grand Prix was run not on the usual layout, but instead on the endurance circuit. And spoiler alert, everybody hated it and it never returned. In 2020, however, the shortened season led a few circuits to run multiple races, and to add a little variety, the 87-lap Sakhir Grand Prix was run on Bahrain's outer circuit, which includes a chunk of the endurance circuit, and we saw a good deal of overtaking at turn 7. Now, of course, the cars will have been running less aero than usual, but I wanted to try and incorporate that into a new layout. The problem the endurance circuit has is that it's all rather congested. It's clumsy. So from the start of the lap, I've done my usual trick of smoothing out turns 2 and 3 before a lengthened run into turn 4. I've accentuated the angle slightly, but for all intents and purposes, this is the same section of circuit, merely shifted east by 115 metres. Rather than leading to a short straight and a slow right-hander, the new turn 8 is an increasing radius right-hander, increasing both flow and overtaking opportunities into what's now turn 9, before it too is followed by an increasing radius left that brings us back onto the accepted Grand Prix circuit, not all that far downstream from turn 4. Now, I'm sure a lot of you won't much like this, but I wanted to give it a go and see if we could have both worlds, and I don't think it's all that bad. Bahrain does have a couple of nice sweepers, turns 17 and 18 on my layout, but why not add another? The advantage of being in the desert is that by only demolishing a grandstand, the straight after turn 19 can curve out to the left, allowing us to build something like Monza's Parabolica to round off the lap. Okay, fair enough, this is all very silly, and it would decrease overtaking, but Parabolica is one of the sport's greatest corners, so what's wrong with injecting it into a middling circuit? If we ignore the start-finish straight now being longer than that at Fuji, and possibly not meeting Grade 1 standards, I've just made a lap of Bahrain last for nearly 4.9 miles. I'm very sorry. Having done this, however, there are circuits that I do think are beyond saving. Most street circuits, for example, are confined by the fact that they're street circuits. And amongst the permanent facilities, I don't think Shanghai's up to much. While I recognise that some people do enjoy it, I don't like the decreasing radius first corner. The tightening of turns 7 and 8 as well just feel dull, contrived and laboured. I've mentioned flow several times in this video because I believe that makes a fun circuit to race at, and Shanghai feels specifically designed to be anti-flow. So in my ideal world, there's no way it remains on the calendar. A few, if certainly not all, street circuits would also be dropped, but another I'm struggling with is Zandvoort. Now, this year's running will be the last Dutch Grand Prix, and while Zandvoort has a rich history, the circuit is a shadow of its former self. In red is merely the current Grand Prix circuit, while grey marks the original 1948 circuit. After Zandvoort fell off the calendar in 1986, half of the circuit's land was sold to developers, leaving the owners to build a much tighter, shorter circuit never really designed for Formula One. I must say that I think they did a good job with what they had, and the changes made in 2021 really livened it up for the return of the Grand Prix circus. But without going mad like I did with Bahrain, I don't think there's much room to really improve on what already exists. But if it were viable, the answer would be to simply expand to the north, follow the dunes as the original did and as the run-up to Schivlach still does. Speaking of lost historic circuits, we find ourselves in Austria at the Red Bull Ring. Built in the late 1960s as the Österreichring and holding the Austrian Grand Prix across 3 spells, this circuit is one of the classics in spite of being entirely rebuilt in 1995. The Grand Prix circuit has remained the same since then, but in becoming the A1 Ring and now the Red Bull Ring, a section of circuit to the west has been abandoned. In 2016, new access routes were built, plus a pair of chicanes, theoretically allowing racing to recommence on something like the old layout. The problem is that no barriers have ever been built, and due to local objections, no racing is ever likely to take place. After all, a village in direct line of sight from the old route is protected from the current circuit by both a hill and a forest. But imagine an ideal world where that's not an issue, and I've reinstated the Western Loop that hasn't seen a race car in over 30 years. Where the modern circuit turns right, illustrated in grey, we continue up the hill to a new, larger chicane on the same site as the one built in 2016, before rejoining the original layout. This is entirely necessary, as the crest here is pretty massive. Even in the 70s, they recognised how dangerous the Hellerlicht curve was, building a 3-part chicane on the inside, complete with characteristically massive curbs. On the site of that old chicane is where my layout's pit lane ends, and the circuit continues down through the high-speed Dr. Tirok right-hander before heading back up the hill towards reality. A little before the 2016 chicane, however, which I've included in grey, I've diverted us right and into the forest. I didn't want to delete the brilliant overtaking opportunity that is the modern circuit's turn 3, now turn 12, so I followed the line of the trees through the forest down to a hairpin where grandstands currently reside, and after dropping downhill, it rejoins the Red Bull Ring we know. The rest of the circuit is left pretty much as is, barring the final 2 corners. While the Rindt and Red Bull curves do often catch out drivers, I wanted to bring back the sweeping nature of the original 1969 Rindt curve, as this isn't an overtaking opportunity and it would give us a chance to see more of the cars under high tyre loads. Again, this is a bit of a long one, coming in at nearly 4.3 miles, so we've turned one of the shortest Grand Prix circuits into one of the longest. With local objections and the massacre of trees to make this work, it's another circuit that will never exist, but it's cool to think about nonetheless. From something entirely unrealistic and towards something theoretically realistic, at least if someone had a pot full of money, and the Circuit de Catalunya. Built to host the 1991 Spanish Grand Prix, 2026 will be the final year that Barcelona is a permanent calendar feature, and I think that's a bit of a shame. In practice, however, the problem Catalunya has is overtaking. There are plenty of circuits that I actively dislike, but that produce better racing than the ones I do like. So as with Imola, that's what we're going to change. At the end of the main straight, you'll see that I've tightened turn 1. I've not relegated it into being a sheer 90-degree right-hander, but the speed that can currently be carried through really reduces the braking zone and scuppers overtaking. My hope is that the circuit will feel no different, but will achieve much greater things. Further to that, I've pushed turn 5 out and deep into its present gravel trap. The run down the hill therefore decreases the corner's radius, naturally tightening it. Again, I don't want it to feel any different, instead it's a purely practical modification. And critically, I've not changed the character of the circuit, because while many people aren't so keen on Catalunya, I do rather like it. Sure, this 80s and 90s era of circuit design is very manufactured, and the constant radius corners don't offer the greatest of overtaking opportunities. What's interesting, however, is how it's been modified in recent years. In 2003, turn 10 was transformed into a tight left-hander before a kink returned the circuit to its original path, and in 2007, a terrible chicane was added to the end of the lap. Both of these have now been thankfully removed, the current turn 10 being a recreation of the original just inside its path. This has seriously reduced overtaking, so to bring that back, I've lengthened the straight to a new hairpin left which leads uphill to a much faster turn 11. This is a little stop-start, but by increasing speeds elsewhere, I think it all evens out, and the 3 changes I've made objectively improve the spectacle. The final change I've made is the unrealistic part, as it requires demolition of the stands that line this section of the circuit. But as I'm not really a fan of the camber at turn 11, I thought I'd change its character entirely, leading it out to a new straight and the long, fast right-hander at turn 12. The closing turn 13 is therefore approached much faster, hopefully making it more of a challenge even if, like turn 10, it would require more runoff. Another we absolutely cannot change the character of is the legendary Spa-Francorchamps, and the fact that the Belgian Grand Prix will now be held every other year is a disgrace upon the sport. But what I find so interesting about Spa is the fact that this modern circuit, with brilliant corners like Rivage and Pouhon, was only built in 1978. And since then, the only part of the circuit to be materially changed is the clubhouse chicane. Now, in deference to the chicane that existed between 1981 and 2006, almost everyone calls this the bus stop. But since 2007, it hasn't been a bus stop. It doesn't look like one, and as Spa is now a permanent facility, there are no buses. The original left-hander was called Clubhouse Corner, so for me, it's the clubhouse chicane. When this was built, they wanted to increase overtaking and lengthen the start-finish straight, things they undoubtedly achieved at the expense of flow. I'm of the view that people look fondly upon the bus stop, specifically the pre-2004 version, partly because it was cool to see the cars bouncing over curbs, but mainly as it didn't interrupt the circuit's flow like the current chicane does. Objectively, it was bad for racing, so let's find a go-between. I've moved the chicane about 90 metres closer to Blanchimont in order to give us a wider and more gradual pair of corners than the switchbacks we're used to. A further benefit to this is another lengthening of the start-finish straight, and though overtaking may be trickier, it should feel much more natural to drive. Plus, an S-bend could delete the chicane altogether while retaining the modern pit lane, if you don't care for safety, that is. As you may have noticed, however, I have made one further modification, and it's to Eau Rouge and Raidillon. Now, I understand that this may make people angry, but in a Grand Prix car, Raidillon is not enough of a challenge anymore. All I've done is divert the circuit to force a little bit of braking, accentuating the curves that are already present. In fact, a lot of these historic circuits have seen the opposite of this happen over time, where famous and challenging corners have been made easier by widening the circuit or removing bumps. I'm simply redressing the balance, though with the recent building work, this will never happen. But as I mentioned earlier, the Spa we know and love is actually quite modern. It's only 6 years older than the Grand Prix circuit at the Nürburgring, but when required, the old Nordschleife is brought back into service and it's used by the likes of the World Endurance Championship. There's a similar event at Spa-Francorchamps, but the old triangle was not retained as part of the modern circuit's infrastructure. So why not bring it back? After all, the streets around Le Mans are closed for the 24-hour race, so here's a design that integrates the classic with the modern. The Grand Prix circuit retains its course through to La Fagna, where instead of turning right, a new section of road allows the circuit to loop back on itself, following the quite dramatic terrain before joining the historic public roads before Hurt de la Côte. I've added a chicane before this just to slow things down before the cars continue through Bournonville, Malmedy and the famous Master Kink. I'm hopeful that modern safety standards and modern aerodynamics will reduce the risk here, but the cars will need slowing before Stavelot, so there's a chicane at Hollowell. There's another up at La Carrière before we rejoin the Grand Prix circuit and Blanchimont is returned to its former ridiculous glory before rounding off an 11.3 mile lap of Spa's new endurance circuit. I know I've just gone entirely off-piste, but it brings us neatly onto my next victim, which is the Nürburgring. And unlike Spa, I'm not really a fan of the modern Grand Prix circuit. The design is very 1980s, and in isolation, I wouldn't think it's so bad. But it's the Nürburgring, so something must be done. My latest mad idea is to essentially give up on the Grand Prix circuit and bring back the Südschleife, the South Loop. Built alongside the famous Nordschleife in 1927, the shorter, less dramatic Südschleife held lesser competitions, so today is largely forgotten. When Formula One demanded Armco barriers in 1971, the Südschleife was left to wither, and come the early 80s the surface was breaking up and nobody was really using it. When the modern Nürburgring was built in 1984, the Südschleife was abandoned and its downhill run was converted into a public road, where it remains to this day. If you're a bit of a nerd like me and ever find yourself in the area, I definitely recommend driving on what was once a section of Nürburgring. While if you've ever camped for a German Grand Prix, the run back up the hill is now an access road. What I've therefore decided to do is to join the modern Grand Prix circuit back up to the old Südschleife and convert it into a circuit that feels much more relevant to its heritage. At the first corner, we're avoiding the arena section, and I've returned it to the pre-2001 right-left S's. At about the point where the sprint circuit turns right, we're going to turn left and back on ourselves, up a short straight to the right-hand turn 4 at Brankenkopf, where we join the Südschleife proper. We then cascade down the hill through a beautiful flowing section of corners to Aschenschlag, where the grey section shows where the Südschleife originally ran. Speeds should be pretty high here, so as the cars are still heading downhill, I've created something of an overtaking opportunity and added a chunk of safety. We then continue through another right-left at Siefgen before reaching the base of the circuit and the long right-hander known as Boxberg. You'll notice that the original circuit diverges here to Mullenbach, a 90-degree right-hander before it heads back up the hill. In the decades that have gone by, this section has been absorbed into the town itself, so it's not even a shade viable to bring it back into use. The public road runs between the grey and red sections, as I've ran my proposal uphill into the camping fields before a tight Mullenbach chicane feeds us onto what's now an access road and up to the hairpin at Spa-Francorchamps. While I've not traced the paddock section of the original onto my proposal, the following left-hander is longer, allowing it to rejoin the Grand Prix circuit ahead of the Michelin curve, where it turns left. For the sake of length, I've simply continued the straight all the way up, through the arena section to Hatzenbach, before the current chicane ends the lap. While this doesn't have the history of the Nordschleife, the Sudschleife has endless amounts more Nürburgring character than the 80s Grand Prix circuit does, and in relative terms, it's an acceptable length, 4.9 miles to be exact. As we discussed earlier, there are some circuits that I think are beyond saving, but I also think a few don't really need any further modifications. I suppose Spa would also fall into this category, barring that final chicane, but close behind it in terms of my current calendar favourites is Silverstone. Growing up, I never quite saw the attraction. The final bridge layout from 1997 to 2009 was a very stop-start kind of circuit. I think people loved it because the run from Luffield to Club was world class, but the Abbey chicane killed Bridge Corner, and it was never as fast a circuit as everybody liked to believe. For me, the 2010 onwards layout is a work of art. It's one that, like Spa, isn't really historic, but will become historic in good time. If I had to change anything, I'd smooth out the short straight between the loop and Aintree just to improve the way things feel, and I'd do the same at Club, returning it to the original course. Another for which I feel like this, though for very different reasons, is Yas Marina. The Abu Dhabi Grand Prix was first held in 2009, and barring championship jeopardy, I don't think many of us really enjoyed the racing. The changes made in 2021, however, really brought some life into it. Finally, it wasn't all 90-degree corners, and though Turn 5 isn't as much of an overtaking spot as it should be, it's constrained by the huge grandstands. Similarly, the section from turns 11 through 15 is hamstrung by that silly hotel. It's almost as if it's a resort first and foremost, racing circuit second. So it's not my favourite by any means, but the first sector's alright, turn 9 is cool, and the rest of the lap is a hotel. I honestly don't think there's very much wiggle room to materially improve the racing, so I'll just leave it alone. Having gone a little bit mad with Spa-Francorchamps and the Nürburgring, I'd like to tone things down a little and bring Formula One to one of my favourite circuits in the world, Laguna Seca. Opened in 1957, the California course has attempted to get onto the calendar once before, in 1988 to be exact, but they chose Phoenix instead. However, that didn't stop Laguna Seca from expanding as part of their bid, building the infield section between the Andretti hairpin and Turn 5. The grey section illustrated here is the original circuit, which was exceptionally fast, but even nowadays at 2.2 miles, a lap in a modern Formula One car would probably take around a minute. So let's do something about it. This new circuit is 2.7 miles long, so still shorter than most, and a lap will not take long. But I've decided to transform Turn 4 into the right-hander of an S-bend, allowing the circuit to rise uphill into a natural amphitheatre between hills on each side. The new Turn 6 is therefore both a decent overtaking opportunity and a great vantage point if they built terraces around its perimeter. The flat-out Turns 7 and 8 then bring us across the current circuit and down to a slow left-hander that returns to the route of the original circuit. The new Turn 10 is therefore the original Turn 3, in service for the first time since 1987, making Turn 11 once again a real challenge as the cars crest the hill. Following the famous corkscrew, the cars cascade down in the manner they always have, but I've modified turn 16 by opening it up, increasing speeds into the final corner, which should become much more of an overtaking opportunity. Despite this being a rather short circuit, I feel I've engineered in up to 3 extra overtaking opportunities, all while maintaining the character of what's already there. So with 4 opportunities overall in a circuit only about as long as the current Red Bull Ring, I don't think that's too bad at all. Remaining in the United States but moving to the current host of the US Grand Prix, Austin's Circuit of the Americas was opened in 2012, and I think everybody's pleased with the quality of the racing. I could easily place this alongside Silverstone and Spa in thinking that it doesn't really need any changes, but for the sake of doing so, why not? COTA's final sector I don't think is all that fun to drive, but it produces brilliant racing, so I've left it mostly intact. The twisty section labelled here from turns 9 to 13 is just as it was, but turn 14, the long, flat right-hander, does that thing I don't like. Rather than being one continuous curve, it's lots of little ones. I've rectified this by making it a tiny bit more challenging, and at turn 15, Indy cars just run off the circuit anyway, so I've rounded it out by making it a fast left-hand sweeper. It's towards the beginning of the lap, however, that I've made a more controversial change. Turns 3 through 6 were designed to emulate Maggots, Beckett and Chapel at Silverstone, and as per the originals, the cars gradually slow through each. The problem is that come the grey section afterwards, it feels very laboured. The flow of the circuit is entirely disrupted, so I've decided to delete it. Tightening turn 6 a little before the new turn 7 crests a hill, unsettling the cars before they head downhill to the hairpin. This shouldn't materially affect the racing, even increasing overtaking into turn 8, but it will make the circuit flow much better, and it should be quite cool to watch if the gradient is as I suspect. This will severely reduce lap times, but as COTA's quite long, this new lap is still 3.5 miles. Before any more genuine silliness, I wanted to introduce another new, or more correctly, returning circuit to the calendar. While I've mentioned my love for Silverstone, my favourite British racing circuit is Brands Hatch, which hasn't held a Formula 1 Grand Prix since 1986, when Nigel Mansell pipped Williams teammate Nelson Piquet to the flag, the pair lapping eventual world champion and third place Alain Prost. My feelings towards Brands Hatch, or at least before Silverstone was so radically improved, can best be summed up by everybody's favourite Murray Walker, who asked why the authorities spend millions of pounds trying to turn Silverstone into a great circuit when we already have one in Brands Hatch is a mystery to me. That being said, there are a few very good reasons why Brands Hatch doesn't hold the British Grand Prix. First and foremost, it's a narrow, classic and risky circuit. It doesn't have the acres of airfield runoff that Silverstone has, and in amongst the trees, there's not much room for improvement. Plus, a lap around Brands would take barely a minute, and there isn't much opportunity for our modern, overweight Grand Prix cars to overtake. What I've done, therefore, is preserve the old Grand Prix circuit, adding a new section in the fields north of the Indy circuit, plus a new start-finish straight. This is quite necessary as the existing paddock is very tight indeed. With a slightly more open run into Paddock Hill, I cannot comprehend how cool it would be to see modern drivers going wheel to wheel here. The only change I've really made to the old circuit is to revert Graham Hill Bend to its pre-1999 form, just to improve flow. I understand why it's been made a 90-degree left-hander, but with the other changes I'm making, it can go back to how it was. At the end of a normal lap, the straight at Clearways is lengthened before a new flat-out Jim Clark curve directs the cars towards an increasing radius hairpin. This will be a little more open than Druid's, but with such a large braking zone, it will become the biggest overtaking opportunity in the lap. The easy turn 13 leads to the medium speed 14 before the final turn 15 brings the cars back to the finish of the character preserved yet modernised Brands Hatch. And with a length of 3.2 miles, it's now longer than the likes of Imola. Our final circuit for today, as frankly I could be here for hours, is Formula One's oldest circuit, Monza. And with so much heritage and alternative layouts, the scope is almost endless. Crucially, we have to ignore the fact the circuit lives in a national park. Just imagine it doesn't. And as the Cathedral of Speed, you know what I'm going to do. Yes, the oval is back, but hear me out. The full 10-kilometre circuit is way too much. So while my design engineers in a new wider start-finish straight so racing could be achieved here, the Grand Prix circuit is to be a hybrid of road and oval circuits. Let me talk you through. As I mentioned, a new wider start-finish straight would allow a 10-kilometre circuit to exist, but as a side effect, it redirects our Grand Prix circuit just a little bit. And you'll have noticed that Variante Rettifilo is gone. Now sure, Curva Grande will now be a 230 mph corner, so its runoff may need some work. That or move the circuit inside its current path, which is the same trick they pulled in 1995. Anyway, stay with me. The straight up to Variante della Roggia has been moved inside, and the chicane itself has come back by quite some way. However, the new chicane flows better than the old one, and it's physically larger, so overtaking here will be improved not only by the speeds, but also the design. Going into Lesmo 1 therefore, the cars are going much faster, so we could see this turn into an overtaking opportunity as well. Now, I love Lesmo 1, but Lesmo 2 always feels too tight, too direct, so I've returned this section to the design it had between 1955 and 1993, opening up Lesmo 2 into a smooth, flick down a gear, pitch the car in and hope it sticks kind of corner. The Ascari chicane remains in place, but the back straight is where things change. The new slowest corner on the circuit is halfway down, bringing the cars through another 2 turns and onto the back straight of the oval. But like at Fuji, I'm not expecting Formula One cars to use the huge banking that's been abandoned for over 50 years. Instead, I build a road just to the inside of it, place a barrier maybe a third of the way up, so the banking remains in place, but Formula One just uses Zandvoort levels of height. That then brings us back to the pits, but facing in the wrong direction. So where Monza's junior circuit turns right off the straight, we turn through a 90-degree left-hander before curving back to the right and joining the road circuit just before Parabolica. The reason I've done all this is to integrate the majesty of the banking with Curva Parabolica without needing a 6.2 mile lap. Now obviously, the fact it's a park would scupper a plan of this magnitude, but I've routed turns 10 through 12 to avoid many of the trees. Again, the run from turn 15 up to the Parabolica would cut through the paddock, but that could easily be extended towards the final corner. In short, it's brilliant, I know. And while Monza gets even faster, it's now a 5.3 mile lap, so it's done exactly as I wanted. It goes without saying that this is all a bit of fun for nerds like myself to enjoy, but if you grew up anything like me, sketching racing circuits as an 8-year-old, then send me yours. I'd love to see them, because, well, I'm a bit weird. I'm now going to lie down and think about what I've just uploaded to the internet, and probably watch Jim Clark drift Lotus Cortinas. Sounds good. So thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please do click like and subscribe to TwinCam as well. I'm forever indebted to my wonderful Patreon supporters, so if you'd like to support me that way, then please do follow the link in the description. And I'll have more videos coming along soon.